The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he put this question to his disciples: "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say he is John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But you," he said, "who do you say I am?" Then Simon Peter spoke up. "You are the Christ," he said, "the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Simon, son of Jonah, you are a happy man, because it was not flesh and blood that reveals this to you, but my Father in heaven. So I say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the underworld can never hold out against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be considered bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be considered loosed in heaven." Then he gave the disciples strict orders not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. From that time, Jesus began to make it clear to his disciples that he was destined to go to Jerusalem and suffer grievously at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and to be put to death, and to be raised up on the third day. Then, taking him aside, Peter started to remonstrate with him. "Heaven preserve it, Lord," he said. "This must not happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle in my path, because the way you think is not God's way, but man's." The Gospel of the Lord. So Peter confessed Jesus as the Christ, Son of the living God. And by the way, this passage is a passage that every Catholic should know by heart. It's so important for us because it's the backbone of our faith, especially of the backbone or the justification for the papacy that we have today, the beginning of the tradition that has been handed down from generation to generation until we have it as we have today. So this is the origin, the foundation of the church, which was built on Peter. So Peter confesses Jesus. He confessed that Jesus is the Christ, Son of the living God. And Jesus quickly said to him, "Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven." In the Jews of that time, when you talk about the Christ, which means anointed one, talk about Christ, he is the anointed one. So when Peter was talking about Christ, he's thinking about a king that has been anointed. He has in mind somebody like Saul, who was anointed by Samuel, the first king of Israel. He was anointed and he was called the Christ. And then we have David, great leaders who took the people to battle, and they fought and they won a lot of battles for the people of Israel. So when Peter is saying you are Christ, he knows what he's talking about. And remember, he does not say you are a Christ. That would mean he is an anointed one like any other one, like any other king who was anointed and he took the people to battle and later on he died. But he said, you are the Christ, meaning he's definite. It's a definite one. It knows this is the Christ that we are waiting for. He is the one that the prophets talked about. He is the one that the Lord talked about. He is the one that is a fulfillment of all Old Testament literature. Therefore, when Peter says, you are the Christ, he's saying Jesus is the anointed one. He is not an anointed one like any other person who is anointed, but he is the anointed one who is waited for. But then, when he thinks of the anointed one, it means he's somebody who is greater than Saul, is greater than David. It's one more powerful, who is definitely going to lead the people into battles and win that battle, that ultimate battle. And that is true. Jesus came to win the ultimate battle for us. The battle against sin, the battle against the devil, the battle over evil. But this is not what the people understood. It was a contradiction for Peter when Jesus came, and after he had accepted that he is the Christ, and he told the people he wants the disciples, he gave them strict orders not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. He then interpreted for them what that Christ meant. He said to his disciples that he is destined to go to Jerusalem, where he will suffer grievously at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and that he will be put to death. Complete opposite of what Peter was professing. And that's why Peter stepped in immediately and said, that is not going to happen. That cannot happen. If you are really the Christ, that cannot happen. And Jesus said to him, no, get away from me, Satan. Satan, which from Greek, hasatan, which means an obstacle, because he interprets that immediately and says, you are an obstacle to in my path, because you think like human beings, not like God. So it's a complete contradiction. This is something that Peter could not reconcile. That how can the Christ talk about death when he's meant to save the people, possibly from the hands of the Romans? It's not understood, it's not reconciled. It cannot be reconciled. So yesterday I was watching something about, and that was on YouTube, about people's different impression about God. And they brought this group of people, individually coming up and professing Jesus as God publicly. And they were being bashed by the rest of the world. And then we had these other people who came, and particularly this man who came up and he said, I cannot believe in a foolish God who promotes, who allows evil, who created a world which is full of evil and injustice and all that, cannot be reconciled. There are many people who have left their faith, especially because of this. I've said this many times here, who feel that because things are not happening the way they want it to happen, therefore we quit our faith. I do no longer believe in God who would allow this kind of things to happen to me. Yeah. Well, then you read the story of Jesus and what it means to be Christ. It's all a contradiction. The cross is all a contradiction. That a curse became a source of salvation for all of us. Because cursed was anybody who was hanged on the cross, according to the book of Deuteronomy. But then, this is the way of salvation for us. It's a contradiction that Jesus had to die. Now, if you talk about that, like people who think like that, think about the life of Jesus himself. He was sent by God and allowed to die. How is that possible? How can that be the source of salvation? How can God express his love for us? By dying. And dying on a cross, a sign of a curse. So it's all a contradiction. This is what St. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, from verse 11, from verse 18. He talks about the contradiction of the cross, the contradiction of God's wisdom. That the wisdom, the foolishness of God is bigger than God's wisdom. And this is what we try to do at times. We try to bring down God from up and try to make him more reasonable for us. That we want to think, we want to analyze things the way we feel, the way our little minds can be able to comprehend them. And the truth is that God's ways are not our ways. God's thoughts are not our thoughts, like the prophet Isaiah would say, Isaiah chapter 55. His ways is as far as the heavens are from the earth, that is how far his thought and his ways are far from our ways. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, this is what it means to be a Christian, because being a Christian means we are followers of Christ. That we would experience those contradictions in our lives. That the fact that we suffer is not a sign that God is absent. The fact that we go through difficulties is not an indication that God does not love us. If that was the case, then Jesus was not loved by the Father. And that is not true. Or that Jesus did not love us by dying on the cross. And that is not true. Jesus had to go through what he went through to show us what it means to be loved by the Father. No one can have greater love than to lay down his life for his friends. This is exactly what he did. A real contradiction of what Peter was to profess as the Christ. So Peter could not reconcile that, and there are many people who still do not reconcile the existence of an evil in the world and a good God. A contradiction. How can we reconcile the fact that God loves us and yet we still go through everything? Now read the story of Jesus. Read the life of Jesus, what he went through, and yet still beloved. Remember at the baptism, when God professed, "This is my beloved Son." Beloved. All of us are beloved. Therefore, even when things happen in our lives, my dear brothers and sisters, let us ask God for the great faith to be able to say, okay, this is happening, but I still believe that God loves me in spite of all this.